everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host, Lei Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. If you enjoy this room, please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I'm the managing director at Sino Auto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Good afternoon, Lei. And finally thawed out, Lei and Tu, can you please introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. This is Lei Xing, your co-host, former chief editor of China Auto Review. And this is episode number 115. We just recently, earlier this week, published the Auto Shanghai 2023 special, so make sure to tune in to that episode. I just checked, close to 900 people tuned in to the Twitter Spaces. So, pretty good number.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I should do a screenshot. But anyways, lots going on the past week. Software, you had another rant in your newsletter on software because of what happened to Volkswagen's Cariad. And
no rants, man. Just kicking knowledge.
Yeah, so earlier this week, Volkswagen Group's software arm, Cariad, continued the internal merry-go-round, hiring Bentley manufacturing chief Peter Bosch to run the software arm, versus GM's high-risk, high-reward hire of former Apple exec Mike Abbot to run its new software unit. So
advantage GM.
So a huge, sharp contrast of the tactics or the strategy of these two major automakers. So let me ask you, what worked? What do you think? I mean, on paper, yes, I think GM's hire was, they timed it perfectly, right? Right after Volkswagen Group's. So it's a silent dunking. And
it's just a huge contrast in styles, but strategies.
I want you to be a little bit gentle on Volkswagen Group because they almost got smacked in the face by some cakes. Apparently.
I saw, yeah, right?
At the annual general meeting, so be gentle.
Well, and you and I are in some chat groups with some friends that are aligned with some of these companies. And so I think it's important that you and I are joking around a lot, but hopefully I come from a place of love specifically for the U.S. companies because they've done so much for us over the last 40 years.
You're exactly right. The Chinese term is 打是疼,骂是爱, which means beating is actually showing love. So that's what you're doing.
And we are Asian, and so I don't know about your mom and dad, but generally speaking, if they're not complaining about something, then we're not doing something right as children of Asian parents. So I've actually tried to dial that down a bit myself because I'm tough sometimes on my boys. But again, it comes from a place of love, right? Anyways, so with Volkswagen, and we have to look at this as part of a whole. This is not the first reorganization. And if we're looking at CES and we're looking at Shanghai Auto, they had Hilgenberg out there talking about this and talking about that, about how they're going to launch TechCo next year and they're going to bring it all together. Okay. And Hilgenberg, the CFO, and I forget his name, Lin Longo, the CTO, they were all either traditional automotive or tier one supplier. That's their background. Now, they could have technical backgrounds within the automotive sector, but you know that having spoken with me and being on this podcast for the last couple of years, that to me, that doesn't go far enough. And so I thought if you're going to make wholesale changes to the Cariad management team, Blume had this one opportunity to get it right. And I looked at his move with Bosch, and I don't know Peter Bosch personally, so I don't want anyone to think this is a personal thing, but he's a manufacturing guy that worked at Bentley. Bentley builds a couple thousand cars a year, okay?
Let's say he's a processes guy.
Yeah, he's a process guy. And nowhere up and down his CV does it say, technology ninja. And I think Blume had actually said that we are happy because he's a team player, he's a technical or a process guy or whatever, but it didn't say anything about software and high tech. So I think this is a missed opportunity for Blume to really, really make a huge decision for the entire company, because Cariad is going to be a decisive player in VW Group's strategy and fortunes over the next 15 years, either because they're not going to be able to do it or because they're going to be a difference maker. Okay. And they've had fits and starts over the last 3 or 4 years since it got started, since Cariad was launched by Diess 5 years ago.
No, this was in early, started in 2020, I think.
Yeah. So just 3 years old, just 3 years old.
Yeah.
But they've had like 3 significant management shakeups or management moves. To me, and I kind of say this, and all the traditional auto guys that are listening will know that reorgs happen all the time in the automotive space. They happen to Ford, they happen to GM, they happen to Toyota, less so in some of the Japanese companies and Korean companies, I believe, but they happen all the time. And what that normally means is that they don't know what they're doing, or, the market changes, quote unquote. And so, again, I don't know if this really moves the needle for Cariad. So that was very disappointing. And then number 2, we're looking at the totality and the track record. So GM has been a little bit lumpy. They were initially first to, and let's actually go back to the 80s. GM launched OnStar, launched EV1. So they had, their North Star was pointing in the right direction, or they were pointing in the right direction. They just didn't have the guts to go follow through with it, or the timing in the market wasn't right for those 2 products, whatever. So they had this need to move towards a more high tech and clean energy business model. And we can point to Cruise as them really getting themselves out in front of everyone else in 7 years ago when they acquired Cruise, or 6 years ago for $1 billion or something like that.
16.
Yeah. So that was bold. And then just recently they kicked Apple out of, now they're still using Android as kind of the operating system, the baseline in the back end, but they knew that CarPlay was going to be much more difficult to boot out of their vehicles 5 years from now when there are many more EVs on the road than today. So that was a shrewd move by Mary. And so again, track record of really being strategic about some of these EV decisions, or these digital decisions as well. And then the third is hiring Mike Abbot. And you think about it, they kicked Apple out a week or 2 ago of their vehicles starting in 2023 or 2024.
That's the irony of it.
It is the irony of it, because now they have an insider who likely had some idea of how the architecture works and how everything works together. Now, I'm not clear, and I've spoken to a few of my insider moles. They're also not clear, but he's the executive, and he's an executive vice president. So it's not some vice president role, and not some senior. It's an executive vice president, and he reports directly to Mary. And anyone, and you know this, anyone who's read my newsletter or listened to this podcast for any stretch of time knows that it's not just hiring technical people. It's putting them in positions of leadership, like Doug Field with Ford. And so do I believe that they're automatically going to be successful? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Does Ford hiring Doug Field and GM hiring Mike Abbott put him closer to success than Volkswagen with this reorg with Cariad? I do believe so. So let me ask you, Lei, your thoughts on this stuff, because, I think you're much more objective about some of this stuff, because I do, I feel that with my background in Silicon Valley and with e-commerce startups in China, I think I just see these angles that I'm not sure I think the automotive management teams also see the angles, but they don't have the balls or the stones to really make these bold decisions, maybe.
Yeah, I wanted to get some of my thoughts across your last comment that nothing's guaranteed, right? Success, whether you hire a Mike Abbott or whether you hire a Peter Bosch. On paper.
Completely agree.
Right. So the reason why we say these automakers are legacy, part of it is because their ICE success is a burden. But the other huge part, I think, is culture. So comparing Volkswagen culture versus a GM or Ford culture is completely different because German automakers are much more conservative. Whereas Jim Farley and Mary Barra, in their tenure, have been more bolder in some of the decision making, right? So that's a sharp contrast. And the Oracle of Omaha said in the weekend, he said the auto industry is just too tough. And I want to rephrase that. It should be automotive software. It's just too tough. And we've seen again just today, right? Polestar delayed their Polestar 3 production. Guess what? Because of software.
Because they had an insect problem, too many bugs in their software.
Yeah, so when you combine these things, I think at the end of the day, even for a company, let's say a GM, which is less legacy than Volkswagen, there's still going to be that culture clash. So how that will play out, I think we put a question mark on that. But on paper, yes. On paper, I think the recent hires, I think is more proper on the GM side than the Volkswagen side. That's my take. Nothing is guaranteed, right? Because these companies, right, what we heard all this week, Lucid, Rivian, Fisker, FF, Polestar, even GM, right? GM and Ford, they have production snags of their latest EVs. The Lyric, the F-150 Lightning, whether it's due to software or not, or something else. These growing pains are still playing out, and software is contributing a big part of it. So, but
do you understand why I feel that there needs to be leadership that has that experience, that deep experience? Because car guys, they're not going to get it, not at the level where millions of vehicles can, use this software,
So I tweeted that Mike Abbott's comment, he basically said software is at the center of the consumer and enterprise experience like never before. It's a simple statement, but I think a lot of these high ups, they don't understand how important that statement is. I think that's you can't drive that home more enough, right?
Here's another point that I'd like to make real quick, Lei. Tesla, people love Tesla vehicles. And if you look at the vehicle build quality, it's not great. But you know why they love it? Because the software just works. And it's not buggy and it's integrated, so everything kind of feels like it belongs together. And again, this is where, because you and I know that Tesla is probably, and I'm pulling out my broad brush, quality levels of some of these Tesla vehicles are not good. But
yeah,
they have a loyal following, and that's because largely due to their ability and their control of all of the software.
Yeah, and we've been discussing something that doesn't feel like it's related to China at all, but it's everything related to China because these board members, visiting China for Cariad, that might be the last straw in what has been playing out maybe the last year or more, that something was about to change at Cariad. And I think what they saw in Shanghai is kind of the last straw in pushing that change.
Well,
do you agree? I mean,
I think that Blume had no choice but to listen to the Volkswagen Group China folks.
Yeah, but then again, the only thing tech or software about that hire is Peter Bosch's name itself, Bosch.
Yeah, but I would argue that Bosch is an automotive supplier. They want to reinvent themselves as a technology company, but they're not.
Yeah, look at Bosch. Even Bosch, they have now they're doing their own reorg. The Bosch Mobility solution, I think they did a reorg. They announced that during the annual report. So I mean, right?
They're trying to move upstream, brother.
Yeah.
No, nobody believes me. Nobody believes me. They're trying to move upstream.
Also, upstream, case in point is the investment in TSI semiconductors.
Yes.
In California, right?
Yep.
So, so in terms of transformation, the pace of change and the boldness of change, I think Volkswagen hasn't shown that commitment, whereas GM and Ford, they have. So that's the comparison.
And you and I agree that it will not be smooth sailing. It will continue to be Polestar delaying software launches, but they have to do it sooner rather than later, in my humble opinion. So the GM move to kick Apple out was such a bold and shrewd move by Mary. I think it was the right one because, and you've heard this as well. I've heard Volkswagen is looking at Huawei as their software partner because Cariad was such a mess in China only.
Well, they have worked with Huawei for years. I think Audi has at least.
But I've heard it's a broader partnership, not just Audi. So, and since we're ranting, Lei, I want to say that I still have in the back of my mind Dieselgate. So that reputation that Germany Legacy Inc. earned throughout the years was erased by selling millions of cars with a cheat code. And so they still have that in the back of their minds. And people should not forget about that because I'm not sure why people didn't go to jail because millions and millions of cars were sold.
Yeah.
Due to a lie.
And I think Blume, he still continues to talk about the speed, but they're putting on reverse gear. Almost feels like.
If we're trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, I'm okay to say, okay, take these small steps back in order to accelerate your speed going forward. I get that. But again, the opportunity he had, this is the crazy thing, Lei. You cannot have GM, Ford, Volkswagen Group, Mercedes, the culture, the atmosphere in these companies be ho-hum, kumbaya, everything is normal, because it's not. So it has to be disrupted. You talk about how embedded this culture is, right?
Yeah. And Volkswagen is unique also, or they face their own specific issues. So at the annual general meeting, one of the issues is Xinjiang, right? Nobody else has that issue. And the protesters, that was one of the things that, I mean.
And you know that the Chinese government is going to lean on Volkswagen Group to be a defender of that stuff. So
Ralph, he was at the annual general meeting, and he said based on his personal, I mean, through his own eyes, he doesn't believe there's anything as a using child labor, right? That type of stuff. But
they're going to be kind of put out there by the powers that be as kind of a shield to what's happening. And it's going to be increasingly difficult and pressure-packed because you don't think the United States government and their diplomats are also trying to pressure the German government and these companies, because it is just a really difficult position for Volkswagen Group to be in, because they also want to grow the U.S. market by 50% or 100%. They want to go from 5 to 10% by, I think, 2030. Okay. A big catalyst for that, they believe, is going to be Scout Motors, the old U.S. brand that is a heritage SUV brand or an truck brand that they are relaunching as an electric vehicle SUV brand. And so, it's just Volkswagen Group. And I, the crazy thing is, like, Lei, you and I have spoken with some of these executives. I've spoken with some of these executives in just closed door private conversations. And some of them really still don't see it, but most of them do. But the reasons that they don't make these more decisive decisions is kind of perplexing to me.
Yeah, so maybe switching gears a little bit, we talk about the GM and Ford, what's happening. Whereas Jim Farley, last episode, we said, his decisions are much more realistic, prudent with respect to China. So it played out right yesterday with the JMC Ford announcement of exporting. And then we're also hearing some rumors of headcount reduction for Ford in China, because Jim had mentioned in the earnings call that they want to be leaner. So not surprising. And then maybe some shift at the GM's joint venture, executive shift. So these are playing out. And everybody's got their own problems and solutions. And it seems that the Volkswagen Group is really counting on, they keep announcing we have a strong position in China, which...
For what segment? Help me define strong.
Yeah, so that's the thing is, I'm like, forget about that strong position. You have a clean sheet of paper to begin with, and you go from there.
My take on that really quickly, Lei, because I don't want to beat the dead horse. I think we talked long enough about it, but they're trying to evolve from where they were to where they want to be, and I don't think that can work. I think they need to tear it all down and restart. So I'd look at it like, is Cariad even the right decision to even separate all that stuff out? I don't know.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that the Cariad team is all moving to Hefei with 100% TechCo, which is €1 billion investment. Huge. So now I think the pendulum for Ford is moving toward JMC, and the pendulum for Volkswagen is moving toward Hefei. They have the Volkswagen Anhui, which is an important pillar. They have the investment into Gotion. Gotion, by the way, will be supplying the LFP cells for Volkswagen Group outside of China. I'm assuming it's for Europe for now.
I thought it was both chemistries for Gotion, not just LFP.
In China.
Okay.
Volkswagen Group's China's EVs will be both. But for outside of China, it's LFP. And they have a 20 gigawatt hour plant in Hefei coming online later this year, which I assume will be supplying possibly the Cupra.
Let me remind folks about Gotion, because Gotion is rumored to be the partner for the PowerCo battery gigafactory for Volkswagen in Canada. They've also announced a $2.5 billion battery component factory that they will be launching or breaking ground on in Michigan. And so Gotion is being extremely aggressive. And I'm wondering if there's any concern from the European Union about Gotion building factories, or is it going to be an IP thing in Europe as well?
So this is a huge play by Volkswagen Group. I think we don't see any other major foreign automakers investing. They're a huge shareholder of Gotion, by the way, right? So they got to capitalize or utilize that resource as much as they can.
And they're a huge investor in QuantumScape.
Yeah.
The solid state battery startup in Silicon Valley that we've not heard a peep from. So
and then the play with Horizon Robotics and Thundersoft. These are two in the connectivity and the autonomous driving side of it.
And let's be clear about this, Lei. Horizon is nowhere close to being able to throw out silicon that can compete with NVIDIA's right now. They're nowhere close. So they've invested $2.5 billion in Horizon with the promise that Horizon will be able to build and design a chip that can ultimately compete with NVIDIA's AI chips, which remains to be seen. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on Horizon and Black Sesame, and there's 2 or 3 others that we can talk about, but that are leading the Chinese market in the AI chip space.
Speaking of, so Porsche working with Mobileye on the supervision, I think China had a huge influence because of the success of the Zeekr 001 that's been using. And I think Zeekr in some way, it's not a competitor to Porsche, but the feeling, the positioning of this shooting brake sports kind of model.
It's the closest thing to a competitor, right?
Yeah. So I think for Porsche, it's also a prudent play, minimum. Let's not think about LiDAR, but adding some premium, what they call the premium ADAS, and they feel the supervision is the best way to do it.
So everyone's clear. Supervision does not use LiDAR. It's camera only.
So I believe it's like 11 cameras, 5 radars, some kind of setup.
And Mobileye has, until recently, been largely associated with Geely. And so that's kind of changed. But Mobileye is struggling a little bit relative to Qualcomm and NVIDIA. NVIDIA is the 800-pound gorilla in the space. And they have their own software that they use to, when you purchase and source from NVIDIA, you can use an entirely different language to code. And there are an ecosystem that's been created, which kind of creates this huge moat for NVIDIA customers.
Yeah, they have this REM or road experience management thing, plus their IQ chips. That's their kind of the cream of the crop product, right?
Right.
Yeah. So switching gears again, going back to sales a little bit, I think 2 important launches caught my attention, if not yours. So the BYD Seal Champion Edition launched below 200,000 RMB, effective price cut. The Wuling Hongguang Mini is offering a battery leasing program, $198 a month for 16 months, and you pay less than 20,000 RMB to get it.
Let's be FX people for a second. 200 RMB is about $30. 20,000 RMB is about 3,000 US dollars.
Yeah. So you and I were joking we should grab a few and bring them over and have one for each day of the week with different colors, right?
That is the irony, though, right, Lei? Because in Europe and the United States, vehicle prices keep pushing up.
Yeah.
So it's more and more expensive. So less people can afford to buy a car now in the United States than they could 20 years ago, I believe. So
to explain a little bit of why this is happening is because one feature of the Chinese market, you can be the star for a day, and the next day you fall very hard. And that has happened to the Wuling Hongguang Mini EV. So for April, actually the first quarter of this year, the entire A00 segment, which is pretty much 100% BEVs, actually the sales were down. So one of the few segments seeing actually a big drop in sales. So this is one interesting phenomenon happening at the moment. And April sales actually overall was down month-on-month over March. And right, you had Tesla increase prices, which is a signal.
Nominally.
Yeah. Why they do that is there's a signal. Yo, for all of you guys out there holding your pocket tight, don't. It's time to buy.
Honestly, I also looked at it like a no mas, like no more. We can't do it anymore. So it's like waving the white flag a little bit. So
the general sentiment is that there is this kind of holding the pocket going on. So April, it wasn't through the roof or it wasn't blockbuster month, but in terms of penetration, it's close to 30%.
April should have been pretty concerning for the Chinese government from a sales volume standpoint.
And forget about the growth because we all know what happened last April. So don't look at it as a year-on-year growth because that's superficial.
Those growth rates are just throw them out the door, throw them out the window.
Yeah, and going back to Volkswagen a little bit, right? So I tweeted that one number or a few numbers is that BYD accounts for a third of all NEV sales, so 34% in April. And the NEV penetration within Chinese brands is over 50%. For the joint venture, the foreign brands...
Let me stop you there for a second, Lei. That means that there's a good chance that BYD outsells Volkswagen Group, not just the brand, but the group in China in 2023.
The way it's going now, it'll be very difficult for Volkswagen Group to get over 3 million units, whereas BYD has the 3 million unit target.
They have about, with overtime, likely about 4 million units of capacity in China. And let's say they export a couple 100,000 or 250,000 units of that capacity overseas.
So you know how in China there's a BAT, so Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent.
Yep.
So in the NEV sales chart, it also happens to be BAT. So BYD, Ion, and Tesla.
Oh, right.
I saw a chart with the BAT. It's like, oh, okay.
I got to give Ion a lot of credit. I was on Bill Bishop's podcast this week, and I kind of talked about how efficient BYD and Tesla has been since the beginning of 2022 when COVID supply chain issues happened. Their machines, they're able to not only create enough demand, but fill that demand because of their ability to manage manufacturing. And I should add that Aon has really been a star on the demand and the supply side now as well. So kudos.
Yeah, and so one number that should scare the Jesus out of the foreign, at least the foreign volume brands, is Chinese brands in the passenger vehicle segment is 55.2% in April. The rest are 45% are foreign brands.
We're looking at ID series vehicles really getting down to the 2,000 a month, 3,000 a month number kind of thing. It is that bad because they're either going to have to sharpen their pencil at least once or twice again this year in order to keep that sales volume to a respectable level, monthly sales volume to a respectable level, or it could effectively fall off a cliff. That curve could fall off a cliff.
Yeah, I mean, you say giving the benefit of the doubt. Well, we're giving NIO and some of these, smart EV startups are also facing a challenge. So we're giving NIO the benefit of the doubt because they are in that switch mode, and we're all expecting, okay, let's see what happens in the second half, right?
But we know that the ET7 is not going to be a high running sales volume leader. So we have to look at the ES6 and we have to look at the ET5. So let's say April is a wash. When we get into May and June, we need to look at the ET5 and the new ET. Well, let's look at the ES6 numbers in May. No, I mean in June, because the ES6 is just launching right now. So it's not going to be able to rescue NIO's sales numbers until probably July, August timeframe. Yeah.
Q3, yeah.
And remember that they talked about 250,000 units this year, which is going to be tough.
I do not think they'll get there. It's, let's say 200,000 units. I'll say it's a win for NIO.
Okay. And they were at 120 something last year, correct?
Yeah, so that's why they said they want to double, roughly 240, 250.
But this is what we need to start really paying more attention to, Lei, and I've mentioned this probably 6 months ago, 7 months ago. Are these companies growing faster than the market? And so the market is supposed to grow by 30-ish% this year to, let's say, you said it's not going to hit 9 million. So let's say it gets to 8.5.
Yeah, so January to April, NEV's CAAM's numbers growth was at 42.8%. So 2.2 million in the first 4 months of the year. So that can give you an idea of the roughly what may happen full year. But
so that's a pretty decent number for the first quarter of 2023, but it was goosed by price war. And so that number could have been a lot less if Tesla wouldn't have cut prices in January and everyone else followed them down that hole. But we also know that Q1 is historically the slowest quarter for Chinese vehicle sales. And so we expect that the Chinese government will intervene, put their thumb on the scale a little bit to re-up some incentives. They've pushed out the
6B.
Yeah, 6B regulations.
You were going there, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So as we expected, right? many times earlier this year. At least one of the, what do you call it? Is that a carrot or a stick? That's a...
Well, if it's something nice, it's a carrot.
It's
if
a carrot,
it's something
right?
mean, it's a stick.
So I think we have 3 sticks, so 3 carrots. 1 carrot has been given out. The other 2 are the extension of the purchase tax exemption and the purchase tax savings for ICEs. Still possible, but we'll see. And Li Auto, right? So they're at the pinnacle. They had their earnings yesterday. So basically, 30,000. Li Xiang said again they expect 30,000 deliveries in June. So we'll watch out on that. And by 2025, 1 flagship BEV, 5 BEVs, 5 PHEVs. And their goal is just, so they said 20% gross margins. That's their 4-year target. And they just want to grow their market share in the renminbi 200,000 and above segment by 2025.
I think that's smart.
Yeah, I think they said was 20%, so 1.6 million in sales in 2025.
Wow.
And they probably will do, let's say, 300,000 this year. So what's the CAGR? I mean, you can do the math, right?
Oh, that is a massive, massive, massive number, CAGR. But Li Auto, I think, is doing the best out of the triplets. We call them triplets. Neo, Xpeng from a share price standpoint.
Yeah, and I just helped a friend of mine buy L7
Yeah, dude, I
Pro.
saw you take credit for that. I saw you take credit for their sales.
And she's like, I didn't want a Max because I don't want my daughter to see that big screen in the back.
Oh, jeez.
So these are and then she's like, I have, quite a few of my friends looking at it. It's like they want to buy it too because it feels so luxury, so premium.
So we're seeing now that EREVs are becoming major considerations for at least Li Auto.
Well, and pretty much everyone else, because if you look at the sales numbers, PHEV growth are actually going much faster than BEVs. And you have these, so for example, Li Xiang, he dunked without naming the model, which is basically the Great Wall Wei Lanshan, which is right below 300,000 renminbi for the same size of let's say a L8.
Yep.
So trying to undercut. And he was like, they're nowhere near the top of, the rankings. They're like number 20 or something.
But remember, I want you to tell the listeners the first time you saw the L8, L7, L9, were you impressed? Like interior and stuff?
I went to the salon in the mall to check out they had the 7, 8, 9 all on display. And
it is. I mean, the fit and finish, it just feels like high quality. And you can be a fan of the 2 big screens on the front console or not, but the doors close really tight, really firmly, and the quality of the materials very high. And I was like, wow. And first time I saw the L9, and drove it. I was like, this is gonna break German hearts, this vehicle for sure.
Yeah. The thing is, so L7, if I put on my consumer hat and if I was living in China, is something that I would seriously consider buying.
Right. Because that's the $50,000 car?
Yeah, so it's a 350,000, let's say, renminbi. They had the Air coming out, which is just slightly above 300,000 renminbi. So the irony is, they're trying to take away shares of ABB, right? But Li Xiang said, interestingly, they're copying the distribution roadmap of ABB in terms of expanding into, the 2nd tier, 3rd tier, 4th tier cities. So I thought that was interesting.
And this is some of the challenges for those companies. You had mentioned it last week on the show, perhaps, or was it in a separate conversation? Because Neo, didn't you say 70% of all Neos sold are in Shanghai?
A third of Neo are in Shanghai.
Or a third, sorry.
Yeah. This is somebody from Neo that told me this. Okay. So I didn't make this up.
Now, despite Shanghai being the largest vehicle market in China, that's a problem for NIO that they need to get resolved quickly. That's just like,
Same for, the Avatar 11. We haven't been to Chongqing, but I'm hearing that in Chongqing, there's tons of them in Chongqing because they're made there.
So just so everyone knows, Chongqing is the headquarters of Changan. Changan is the owner of Avatar, the EV brand, or the PHEV brand.
Yeah.
And one thing that I wanted to ask you before we open up to the room.
The Geely Changan, I wanted to.
Yeah. So we can talk about Changan a couple times here. Do you think Ford has given up on Changan then?
The pendulum is definitely swung over to JMC because what Jim Foley said, utilizing this Ford Pro distribution network, which is making money, where the business unit is making money, and that export agreement of shipping some of these commercial vehicles outside of China, that's a prudent profitability play rather than saying that, we have to...
Because it's basically, they're going to be the Asia hub.
Yeah, and Ford owns 32% in GMC.
Yeah.
And that's that's 1995, I believe, investment was made.
So for everyone trying to figure this out, China is still one of the lowest cost base for manufacturing vehicles. You can point to Shanghai Giga as an example of that. And it doesn't make a ton of sense for Ford to be shipping from Europe or the United States because logistics costs on commercial vehicles would crush them. And the vehicle cost would actually be much higher than if they were built in, where's JMC?
Nanchang.
Nanchang
in Jiangxi province, where Jim was actually in April. So,
and if we're talking about China in China, Nanchang is probably, I would say, half the price of living in Shanghai.
Or maybe a third.
Yeah, even less, right? Even less. So the average salary of a Nanchang auto employee is probably a few $100 a month. Am I right? A few $100? Yeah.
I don't know, but it's definitely cheaper.
Yeah. And then let's do this. You can talk about Geely Changan, but
yeah. So we listed the Geely Changan in the topic because they announced a kind of a collab earlier this week, kind of out of blue for some reason. I say that because recently they had a quarrel, these two companies, on products. On the design of the the Geely Galaxy, they had a concept. Yes. I think there was some fighting going on over this new head of design who moved from Geely over to Changan.
Right.
So for this to happen was really interesting because of that, and because Geely and Changan, they cannot be more different than each other.
Right.
Geely is a private company. Changan is a military
SOE
background SOE, but they also cannot be more same because they both are multi-branded companies. Changan with the Avatar, right, Shenlan, Deepal, and they both went through a period of where the NEV strategy did not work out. So I believe this was a match made. There's some push, I think, from whether it's the industry associations,
right,
or something else. But having said that, a company we mentioned a few times this past few episodes, eCarX, which, by the way, had their Capital Markets Day this week in New York City. And they mentioned in the presser that they were going to be collaborating on chips. So I'm thinking that eCarX could be at play here. So supplying Changan. So outside of the Geely ecosystem. And it's already happened with Hongqi. So eCarX is supplying Hongqi. So that's where I'm thinking that this could be going, part of the, yeah.
And let's be clear, the Chinese government also wants consolidation to happen. They think that there are too many brands that aren't selling enough vehicles. And so this is probably encouraging to at least folks in the central government. Now, the local provinces are a little bit different, right?
Yeah, and also in the past few years, let's say a decade, I remember there were three very important similar type of collabs announced. So the end of 2019 was SAIC Motor and GAC Group. I don't know if you remember that, but nothing came out of it. In 2012, Chery and GAC Group announced something together. Nothing. That ended with nothing happening. And the three centrally administered SOEs, FAW, Chang'an, Dongfeng, they announced something together. This is irrespective to the T3 mobility platform. They announced something like a collab. Nothing came out of it. So with Changan and Geely, it seems to be more on the surface. It's working together, but
They hugged it out, man. They hugged it out.
Yeah. So still question marks. Really, what's gonna transpire out of this agreement?
Well, it does make sense that eCarX would try to recruit more OEMs to use this platform. So
let's just say this: the Geely is a lot more vertically integrated than Chang'an, and Chang'an is betting with the Huawei play, right? With the Avatar.
And I think most Western folks probably hear about SAIC and FAW much more than they do a Chang'an. So there's, it's good that we educate them a little bit on Chang'an, which is headquartered in Chongqing, which is the capital of Sichuan province.
No, it's an independently planned city.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
So, yeah.
But every time I talk about Chongqing, my friends that are from Chongqing always say it's the biggest city in China, blah, blah, blah. The women are beautiful and super tall. So it's like clockwork.
That's a bit stereotypical, but
yes, that's what they. I don't say it, man. It's just every single time I hear about Chongqing, that's what people say about it. So
yeah, I think that's it. And the only other thing AV related is the DD again in the news working with GAC Ion. Speaking of GAC Ion, they're setting up a joint venture to produce dedicated level 4 robotaxis.
This dovetails into me meeting with Deep Route and them saying they're working more closely with the OEMs too.
Yeah.
To try to get their hardware and software onto more vehicles. And again, if we're thinking about the Shanghai Auto Show, there were 38 vehicles launched with LiDAR. So L2, L3 is in the near future for China EV Inc., closer than most people realize, and likely going to bleed into European and US vehicles within the next 5 years. We're talking LiDAR and inobtrusive LiDAR that's designed well into either the windshield or the body of the vehicle.
Right. In the case of a Jidu.
Yes. And let me do this. I'm looking through my newsletter.
Yeah, so I'm done. I think we covered a lot.
There's a cool Reuters article that talked about how competitive the market is. Some of the statistics out of it, there were 90 EV SUV models in the China market.
I feel like that's understated. Maybe add a 0 to it.
20 new products that will launch in April. And SUVs, now ICE and EV, SUVs represented 40% of all vehicles sold in the China market. And NIO has applied to use semi-solid state batteries on 3 of their vehicles. I think that's important.
Yeah, that's been like talking the talk forever and not walking the walk.
Right.
And NIO, by the way, has their own legal or something, the legal account.
Yeah, yeah. And so here's a crazy story, because we've seen a few VinFast on U.S. streets now, and there's one friend of ours in particular who seems to be effusive about VinFast's vehicles and company and chances. But there was an article in Bloomberg, I want to say, that said that VinFast has burned through $8.2 billion worth of capital. And
it's not like if they need money, or their lack of money. Well,
that's the thing, right? Because Pham Nhat Vuong, who's Vietnamese like me, he is trying to raise, or VinFast is trying to raise another $2.5 billion. And he's going to be using $1 billion of his own money to get these vehicles into production. So it looks like the going rate, if you're trying to build these at your own factory and you want to start an EV company, it needs to be around $10.5 billion or $10.5 billion. So the chances of that North Carolina facility being built by VinFast are not very high. And so I remember I was reading this article, and I remember about 2.5 years ago getting contacted by Asia Financial, one of the media outlets for Singapore, the financial media outlets. And they had told me that VinFast was looking for a $40 billion valuation at IPO. This was 2.5 years ago. So they delayed the IPO because they can't build vehicles. And so one of the non-China EV Inc. that was one to look out for is we can lump them in with Lucid and Rivian having problems, either with production or capital. With Rivian and Lucid, it's not a capital problem. For Rivian in particular, it's a manufacturing problem. For Lucid, it's a demand problem. For VinFast, it looks like all of the above. So anyways, that's all that I had, sir. It was good kind of talking through all this stuff. I think the first 15 minutes was a little bit therapeutic for me because I got a little fired up about all these software problems because I saw this coming miles away. Anyways, so I guess that's it. Thanks for joining, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.
Yeah, and just to kind of summarize a bit, really, we talked about today is using that Warren Buffett quote again is automotive industry is just too tough. China automotive industry is too tough. China NEV competition is too tough. And software is just too tough. I think that's the conclusion and all of these companies are, the end goal is the same, but the tactics being used are sometimes very contrasting.
Yeah, the paths that they take to get there are completely different.
So this is fascinating to watch, and we can, dunk, right? Criticize, praise. So it's fun. Yeah.
Cool. Hey, I'll catch you on WeChat and WhatsApp then, Lei.
All right. Thank you for all joining. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.